In the recording. My name is Brittany. I'm going to be doing your revenue forecast webinar for today. And again, revenue forecast is basically a way to see or forecast out the revenue. Now, there's a whole help guide on this that's probably going to be your best friend for a while. But if you type into the actual support guide, so we're in support.workamajig.com, and if you type in revenue forecast, there's going to be a couple of options. There's really four. One's going to be an overview, which won't really give you a whole lot of detail, but it just kind of goes over what do we include when we are doing a revenue forecast. But then really most of it, we're going to start from setup and continue to move forward. So first things first, there are rules with revenue forecast. So a lot of clients will email in and say, hey, this should show up in my forecast. Why did it not do that? Well, there's a lot of specific items that you have to have in the system or set up to allow that project to be brought in. There's so many different factors. First would be the actual project status, and we'll talk through each one of these more in depth, but project status, do we allow that particular status that the project is in to be pulled into the revenue forecast? Then the next one is going to be, what's the billing method of the project? So is it time and material and fixed fee or retainer? Each one of those will act a little bit different. So if I say that it's going to be time and material, well, then we have to have an approved estimate, aka budget, in the project in order for that to happen. You also, of course, have to have a schedule. So an actual task schedule in there. And then with fixed fee, again, you have to have an approved budget in there, but you also have to have a billing schedule in there. Otherwise, the system won't go in and kind of forecast that out. And then, of course, retainer, you have to have the whole retainer set up. How much is it? And then those are kind of the pieces that you would have for that. So again, you'll probably review this as you go because you're never going to remember each and every little item. It takes me a while to remember if it's time and material, how does it all work? So again, you have this help guide. It's very handy. There's a lot of screenshots and very detailed information. So I want to go ahead and start with going through some of the setup. So the first one would be, if you're not an admin, do you have rights? Or if you are an admin, who should I give rights to for revenue forecast? So if I'm in menu, if you have the admin manager app, you have systems set up. If you come into the security settings here, you would have the option, I'm just going to go by right because it's kind of easier, but this would be a way to see, do you have anyone set up with rights to revenue forecast? So you'll notice if I type in Revin or revenue or somewhere close to that, you can see the rights on this side. And then when I say, well, who of my group can view and edit forecast, you'll notice I just have it checked for every single one of my groups. And then can they view it for other AEs? So I just turned it on for everyone, but obviously this wouldn't be right for everyone to use. You might not have your creatives or maybe your resource managers viewing revenue forecasts. So if someone says, hey, I don't have the ability to add one in or edit a revenue forecast that I see, it's because they do not have this right. So this would be the first step, is going through and making sure each of your groups have the right if they need it. If you're going by group, then all you do is you click on the group that you want to take a look at. So if I said, well, I want to look at this particular group, then you can go ahead and say revenue, and then it'll find that same thing. And you'll notice again, they have it checked. So you can go group by group. I just don't like to do it this way unless I'm just doing one or two groups at a time. But for me, it's more helpful to always go by right if I want to know who of all of my groups has that particular right. So this is luckily the only one. You just have two to take a look at. And we'll get more into what it means for viewing other AEs, but basically the revenue forecasts have the right, or you have the ability of going in and sending the revenue forecast to your account managers. And then what would happen is they would get a notification in the notification bell that they have a revenue forecast to approve. They can go in and approve it. And then if they have the ability of looking at others, they could do the same for some other account manager. So luckily, not a whole lot for security, but those two different options. And then again, you either go by group or you can go by right. Next thing would be you have global lists here. The next part of the setup is making sure that we know what statuses our projects are in and which ones actually allow us to pull in to the revenue forecast. So this is also a big one. So here's my different statuses. Yours might be a little bit different, but the main part of this is taking a look all the way at the end, which ones are included in the forecast. So you'll notice I just have my very top three. Nothing else gets included in the forecast. So I have quotes, estimating, and production. Everything else is not going to include in the forecast. So I might have a project, it be in one of these statuses, and it's all set up properly. Why is it not pulling in? Again, just the status is kind of what's kicking it out. So this would be the first thing that I would look at to determine, is this project going to pull in to the revenue forecast if I create one? Well, the project status is very first thing. So again, all the way over, you have include in forecast. If it says yes, then that type of project or that particular project would be able to be included in the forecast. Okay. All right, so that is the first step. Now I created a couple of projects just so we can look at an actual revenue forecast. But once you have those pulled in, again, the things that can be brought in would be, there we go. So you have opportunities. You have projects that are set with billing schedules or project schedules. You can have recurring invoices, you can have retainers, and you can have campaigns that pull in to those different forecasts. Okay, so those are typically the items. What's nice is once you're creating a revenue forecast, you can actually exclude something. So if you never want opportunities to pull into a revenue forecast, it is an option to go in and actually exclude those from bringing them in. So first things first is if you go into, you have the today accounting, or you may or may not have accounting today. Otherwise, there's a view for revenue forecasts. But I'm going to go from here because most of the time, if you have forecasting options, you might have the option of taking a look at the today page, the accounting today. So again, it's a view. Under the accounting today, you have revenue forecasts. I have quite a few in here. That I've just been kind of testing with throughout the year, but I can always jump into any of those forecasts that I have actually set up. So if I come in, you can see some of the forecasting that I have done in here. Otherwise, again, if you don't have that accounting today, you're just going into your views. So your magnifying glass, you have views, and then same thing, it would be under accounting. You would see revenue forecast as an option. And then of course all, and that brings you to the same screen that we were at. If you wanted to narrow it down, typically your search criteria will have a year option. Otherwise, you can also search for the forecast name. Okay, so up here, even though I don't have name down here, this would also help you search just by name. So I did a couple of tests. If I call it tests, then you'll see all of the revenue forecasts that I have done for test. Now to actually go in and create one, you have the plus button here, or if I'm not in accounting today, the plus button next to your name. Both are basically the same thing. It's just whatever one is kind of closer wherever you're at. If I'm in accounting today, this might be a little bit closer for me. If I'm not in accounting today, then I'm definitely clicking on the plus button next to my name, scroll all the way down, and then under accounting, you have that revenue forecast option. So if I come in here, typically you want the year in here because as you saw when I was looking at the list of my revenue forecasts, a lot of them were very similar or the same. Technically, you can have multiples with the exact same name. So I try and avoid that, but we'll just call this our webinar 3/23/22. This will be our rev forecast, but obviously you don't have to put revenue forecast, or you can title it however you want to. But again, for me, I like to have it be a little bit descriptive so that I know which revenue forecast is this because I might run it in several different ways. Now I have GL companies turned on, so most of you probably do not. For those that do, which of your GL companies is this forecast for? Okay. Next one is, when does this start? When's the starting year? It'll always default to this year, but you can go in and change it if for some reason you needed to. Most of the time you're not going back, but maybe you're going forward in years, you have that option. The revenue forecasts go in a 12-month view. So if I start it with March, it's going to go, March, April, May, June, July, and continue on for the year. So you have that starting month option. This is, of course, going to be important because if I have some projects that started in January, those are not going to forecast for January and February because I'm starting with March. I mean, there is a prior option in there. It'll show you, well, what would have forecast in the months previous to this, but you're not actually seeing it broken down by month. So definitely something to be mindful of is, when do you want this to start? And if your project started before this month, know that those forecasts would actually be in a column called prior. Next is, what do we want to include? So by default, everything gets included. But as I mentioned before, if you are not going to be doing opportunities, if you don't want those included in your revenue forecast, you're just unchecking whatever you don't want. You have two options for projects. One's approved projects, and then one's potential projects. Potential projects are basically a project that is in a status that includes in the forecast, but it's not an actual approved estimate. Okay, so it'll say projects with unapproved estimates, but there's a box in the estimate settings to say, do I include this in forecast? Because maybe we want a forecast where minorly sure that the client is going to approve or sign off on that particular estimate. So maybe we say, go ahead and include it because I'm fairly certain. But that's what potential projects are, is it's basically a project that's in that status that allows the project to be pulled into revenue forecast, but the actual estimate is just not approved at that particular time. This is approved estimates, projects where they actually get pulled in based off of the project status. Then of course you have retainers. You have invoices that are typically recurring. So you set up a scheduled invoice to say, okay, go ahead and start this invoice, or have this reoccur every 2 weeks, every month, every year, however often you're having an invoice reoccur. You can pull in reoccurring invoices. And then potential campaigns as opposed to approved, kind of the same thing as you saw for projects. It would be potential campaigns would have that that unapproved estimate in it, but we have it including in forecast. Now you have an expenses side. How do we spread out our expenses? You can do from the start, from the end. Most do evenly, just to kind of spread those expenses over the months that the project spans or that it's forecasted. And then you also have exclude expenses. Some people do exclude expenses because maybe their expenses are pass-throughs. They don't mark them up. So in that case, you could just exclude the expenses because there's not really going to be revenue gained from those. So I'm just going to leave it at evenly, but just know that there's different options that you have. One caveat, I guess, towards evenly is when you create an estimate, you go in and estimate for an expense. If you track an expense all the way down to the task level, so when you fill out an expense or you add an expense, there's the task field. You can actually track it all the way down to the task field. If I do that, even if I put evenly, it's actually going to look to the task date to then indicate when that expense would fall and what month that would fall in. Okay, so we'll take a look at what that looks like or what that really means when we get there. The last section is forecast all projects as time and material. So typically right now, how the time and how the forecasting is for fixed fee is it takes a look at the approved budget and then your billing schedule. So there has to be some sort of billing schedule. If we don't really want it to look at that, we want them to forecast all as time and material, basically looking at the schedule of the project, then you can check this box to just have everything forecast as time and material, even if it's fixed fee. Last one is sometimes clients want to narrow this down. They want this particular forecast to be for a particular client or parent client. Well, then you can choose what client this falls under. Otherwise, if this is just a forecast kind of for everything, then you can leave these two fields blank. Any questions on this page before I move forward? And for questions, just use the chat rather than the Q&A. It's just easier for me to keep them all in one place. So as we're going, if you have questions, go ahead and type them into the chat and then I'll get to them as we're going along. Okay, so I don't see any, but I'll keep looking out for those. And then when I have questions or when we have questions, I'll go ahead and work through those. So I'm going to go ahead and save. This will then add in my revenue forecast into the system. 2 questions came in. All of our projects are fixed fee. So did you say that we would click the forecast all expenses, time and material? That's up to you. It's just saying, so if yours are all fixed fee, what it's looking at is the approved estimate. So if I have an approved estimate or a budget of 10,000 for that project, then what happens is it takes a look at the billing schedule. So if you don't have billing schedules, typically those don't pull into the revenue forecast. Okay, and if I have a billing schedule, it evenly says, okay, for the next 4 months, we're going to bill it 25%. Well, then it's going to be 2,500 over the 4 months that it spans. And that's how it works for time and material. Or sorry, fixed fee. Whereas time and material would look at the schedule. It'll say, okay, first task starts, let's say March 1st. And then that project, the last task would maybe go towards like June. So then you have March, April, May, June. That's 4 months that it spans over. And then that divides it over that. So you can choose to have it forecast all as time and material if that's how you want your forecast to happen. How is markup included? So I think it's better if we take a look at an example for that. So I'll show you that whenever we go over that. We talked about the time and material forecast. This one, can we forecast just off of invoices? Yes. So that would just fall under the reoccurring invoices. You can uncheck everything else that you don't want to pull into the forecast and then just have it go off of your invoices. Next question is, if you select to include approved campaigns, how does Workamajig handle the projects that have approved estimates? Well, it's looking at how you're billing. So you have a bill by in the campaign, and it either is for campaign or it's for project. If you're doing project, then it's basing off of all the project information. If you're billing it based off of campaign, then it's just going to look at the campaign information. Next one is, we are hoping to forecast projects over the course of a full year, and often it would include projects prior to actually plugging in an estimate, even if it's unapproved. Is there a way to do this? Well, you can enter in an estimate at any point within a project. So it doesn't have to be done at the very beginning when you're first starting a project, because maybe you started it just to get it going and you're still working with the client to determine budget. At any point, you can put that estimate into the system. And then, of course, that can be pulled in if you pull a new estimate or revenue forecast. So if you created a revenue forecast before you had that estimate, and then eventually you create that estimate in the system, you would just create a new revenue forecast to pull that in. Okay, so that looks like all the questions for now. I'm going to go ahead and save this. That would then create my revenue forecast. And again, I created some test projects. We'll take a look in depth at those projects once we get this revenue forecast up. But the first thing it does is kind of divides it over, well, what is this? Is it a approved project? So again, that's a project in a status that pulls into revenue forecasts, and it has that approved estimate. Is it an opportunity? Is it a potential project, which means it's a project that is in that status, but the estimate is not approved? And then a actual retainer. So I have a retainer in the system. So that's what these buckets are. It's basically what is the type of project that it is. Then you have your project name, Status is going back to when I mentioned being able to send it to an account manager to review. It's not been sent, so I haven't gone in and sent this, but if I did want to go ahead and do that, it would tell me whether it was sent or approved or what status it actually is as far as an account manager reviewing. When is the start date for the revenue forecast? So it's an important note that if my let's say we're going off of task dates because it's time and material. If my task dates start kind of mid-month, it's not going to just evenly divide for that particular month. It'll take a look at, well, this has, like 7 days left. So it'll say, okay, well, 7, if I'm dividing everything evenly, there's 7 days in this particular month. And then the next one might be April. And so maybe it's the full month of April. So the days actually count whenever we're looking at revenue forecasting. How many months does this particular project span over? Currency. So if you have if you have multi-currency turned on, it'll tell you what the currency is for that project. What's the billing method? So FF is fixed fee, time and material, and then this one's retainer. So that would be under the retainer category. Probabilities mainly only count for the opportunities. So on a project, it's always going to be 100%. On an opportunity, there is an actual probability field that you can take a look at or that you can edit, and that would determine how much we are going to have in our estimate or our revenue forecast. What's the total of my my budgets? For some reason it's pulling in 0, but we'll take a look at that. And then this is the prior category that I was talking about previously. So I mentioned, let's say this project actually started in January. We started this revenue forecast going March and before. So what would fall under, or what were the months previous? What was their actual forecast? If you've billed the project, what is our actual billing that we've done up to that point? And then here would be the buckets. There we go. So it just took a while to pull in those numbers, but what would be the actual per month or the forecast of each of those months? The other item, so obviously this goes, the full year. Like I mentioned, it's a rolling year. So whatever month you start at, it'll start and then goes all the way for a year. If it spans past that year, so if maybe this project spans past February of next year, it would also tell you what the next 12 months are. So what's the forecast for those next 12 months? Reviewed is going back to that account manager reviewing process. It's not been sent, so there's no yes or no on the reviewed. It's this client, it's this account manager, it's this office, this type. So again, you have your types here. And then estimate, yes, whether it has an estimate or not. And then the last one is regenerate. This again goes back to that whole reviewing process. Did we need to go ahead and regenerate this line? Meaning if the account manager went in, changed something and said, oh, we had the wrong estimated amount or the wrong budgeted amount for that, they went in and changed it. This revenue forecast is not going to automatically update. Okay, so there's no kind of updating as we go. There is a way to say, okay, well, they updated the project. We want to go ahead and refresh this this revenue forecast. You have an option to say, go ahead and update the forecast. Okay. So that's kind of what your columns mean and how you go in and actually take a look at those. So now we'll jump into each one of these to take a look to actually see, well, how did I set up the project and what is pulling into each of those projects? So this one, I went in, this is a project, it's fixed fee, had a $13,000 budget. I did bill it just so that we had some numbers in the actual billing up to that point. And then you would go through and see, well, how did it go and actually spread those out? So what's making up these totals? You can jump in and actually click into each category to see what's making up those particular numbers. Otherwise, again, I'll jump in and show you how I set up the actual project. So this will tell you your totals, and then home currency. Again, if you're doing the revenue forecast, says home currency in here as well, but here's where it's getting all of those different totals based off of what information I put into the estimate. So we'll jump into this project. So first things first is your project settings. The billing method. So if I'm in here, what is this project? So it's fixed fee. So it's going off of that approved estimate and a billing schedule. Okay. So fixed fee, which means I have an approved estimate in there. If I go to the billing schedule, how did I set up that billing schedule? I did percentages. So I basically said bill 25% of the total budget on this date, bill 25% on April 4th, and then bill the remaining 50 on this date. So this is how it's going to go ahead and parse out the income or the revenue for this particular, for this project. If I go into the estimate, it is an approved estimate, which is what it needs to be. And I broke it down by 11,500 in labor. And then I have some expenses in there. And then if we look at the expenses, this is what I was talking about with task. I mentioned earlier, where if you're dividing your expenses evenly or something similar to that, then what does it do for if you actually have a task listed for an actual expense? It would then look to the task date and then put the expense within that month, the whole expense, rather than dividing it evenly. So I have two different expenses. One is just vague and I called it supplies, 12 of them at $15 each. And we do have a markup, it looks like an extensive markup. So there's 600 there. And then I have the other item is talent, one of them at 15.20, no markup. So it's just kind of like a pass-through expense. These might not make sense as far as business sense, but I just put something in here so that we can see it. So that would be your expenses. And one of you were asking, as far as markup, it is taking a look at the actual markup. So my expenses, even though they cost me 1,700, the gross is 2,100, and this is the number that it's using. So that's how I set this particular project up. Is I have a approved estimate. It's broken down to labor and expenses. I did not track the expenses all the way down to a task level. And since I did evenly divide those expenses, then it is just going to go ahead and actually evenly divide those expenses over the billing schedule that I had. Okay. So that's what it looks like for my project. So now if we go back, I want to go into the revenue forecast so that we can kind of keep jumping back and taking a look. Oops, not a new one. So to go back to the existing one, I'm just going to go to my recents because I know that's where it was. But that's where this project is, right? So it's 3 months that it spans over. It was a fixed fee project. Again, all projects are going to be that 100% probability. This was my total budget. I had not billed that particular that project. Yeah, it's this project. Sorry, making sure I was on the right line. And then so it spanned, 3,405, 3,405, and then 6,800. So that's the 3 months that it spanned over. So that's what it looks like. The next one I set up a little bit different. I don't remember what I did with this one, but this one also is a fixed fee project. I have that billing schedule spanning over those 4 months. I have the estimate in there. It is approved. And then, oh, maybe this is the same one. So I'm looking at a different one. We'll jump over to the time and material one. So this one's an actual time and material project, okay? T&M, or I put it in the name so it would be easy for me to read. Actually, I think I want to open that up in another tab. Okay, so again, it is a time and materials project, which means that I have to have that approved estimate in there, and it's going to go off of the actual schedule. So I'll show you the estimate first. So 20,800 all in labor. I didn't have any expenses for this particular project, but it is approved because I have the option to unapprove it. So 20,850 is the total. And again, it's going to look at the first task and say, okay, well, it's March, right? So you have March 23rd, and then it goes down to May. So March to May is ultimately when this project will span. And so it's going to use those particular dates to then divide that revenue over. So if we're jumping back in here, we're looking at this one, here's the total March, because I didn't have that many days in March, right? Because it started on the 23rd. So again, I mentioned it does make a difference when your project actually starts. So if I started at the very first day of the month, then of course there's going to be that 31 days or however many days in March. There isn't, because we did starting on the 23rd. So that's why only 4,000 is here. 15,000 is in April because it uses the full month of April. And then May, it's not the full month of May, it only goes to the 12th. So again, it's dividing that over the 12th, or sorry, 12 days that are in May. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Again, time and material, just looking at the approved estimate and the schedule of the tasks, scheduled dates, I guess. This one I did a time and material. There's an expense in there, and I actually put it towards a task. So if I go into the estimate, this one had the expense where I actually put a task listed on there. So it's task number 2. I just called it A&T for the task name, but it actually falls all the way down to a task name. Okay. And so what that would do is, sorry, I was looking for my revenue forecast. So on here, we would notice that, I should find out when that's, so task number 2, we'll take a look at the dates for task number 2. So here it is, it goes March to April, right? So then, oops, it is this one, we click into here, and we should see that expense, right? So there's the expense in there, 900 in here. It didn't evenly divide it because again, the bulk of that was, and then here's the other part of that expense. So if it was a 1-day task, it's just going to fall under that 1 month, right? And then if it's kind of spanning over 2, which it didn't really mean to do, but it did that, then it would fall under those 2. Question was, what if those fixed fee invoices on the billing schedule are advances versus revenue? That's a good question. I would assume it would look at whether it's a revenue invoice, because of course, if you're doing your advances, those are typically going to like a pre-bill or a, what is it called? Accrual account or deferred account, whatever the many names are. But since it's not really going to revenue, it's not really considered to be revenue up until you set up the revenue recognition invoices. So revenue invoices are typically what it pulls in. Okay, so that is going to be the approved project part. So we talked through a couple of those. And then the opportunity side is I set up a opportunity in the system. So this one I did make I enabled the advanced features. Okay, and if you're not sure what I'm talking about, when you do an opportunity in the system, there is an option to say, do I enable advanced features or not? There's 2 ways that this plays out. If I do not do the advanced features, then what it takes a look at, actually just make up something here then it'll just take a look at what did you have for your probability. I'm just going to do 100 in here. What months does it span? So if I said this is going to span 3 months and the sale amount is going to be $10,000 and my geo company, then enable advanced features is only going to pull in that opportunity and have it span those 3 months that we talked about. So 3 months is here. when does my forecast close? So I'm going to say, we'll call it June. So I have 10,000. You can break it down into these different buckets. Otherwise, if you're not really sure where to break it down at this point, you could just put in your total revenue, and then this is the number that it looks at. It would know, okay, span that over 3 months, and this is when that closes. So it's going to use all 3 of these sections. If the probability for this is not how sure you are that you're going to win this opportunity. It's how sure you are that you're going to get 10,000. If I do 80% in here, it's only going to do 8,000 in my revenue. That would pull into the revenue forecast. Okay, so this is a huge part of how much will actually pull into that forecast, but these are the fields that it uses. Now, if we wanted to somehow break this down and say, well, our production is going to be, let's say 5,000, and we mark it up 20%. Our media is going to be 2,000. We mark that up 20%. My labor is going to be 3,000. You can have that 10,000 broken down into different sections if you want to. So however you do that, completely fine. But what the whole thing is looking for is that those revenue and AGI numbers, probability, your forecast, and then your months. Okay, so the other way is if you actually did enable advanced features, then this actually acts like a normal project, because it would look at the estimate, whether it's approved or not, if it's going to be time and material or fixed fee. Both of those obviously would fall in line with, well, if it's fixed fee, then it's going off of the billing schedule. If it's time and material, then it's going off of the actual project schedule. So again, enable advanced features just acts like kind of a normal project, just throws it under the opportunity side over here, but follows how we set up the actual regular projects in the system. And then the next one was I had a potential project. So this again was a project that is in that status that does allow it to pull into the forecast. This one is set up as time and materials as the billing method. So then I have an estimate. Neither of these are approved. Okay, so this is the only one that has detail in it, 19,000, but it actually pulled into the forecast because when I was in my estimate, sorry, you have your estimate settings here. If I want this to pull in, because I'm fairly certain that this is going to be the numbers for this project, under your estimate settings, you have this include in forecast. This is ultimately what's pulling it in. If I uncheck this box and save, and if I create a new revenue forecast, this project would not show up because it does not have an approved estimate, and or it doesn't have the include in forecast option. Okay, so if you want it to pull in, but you can't really approve the estimate because it's not a fully approved estimate, then this box is what's going to allow that to pull in. Okay. Someone asked, are you aware, sorry, we use Salesforce to track opportunities. Are you aware of any successful integration with Salesforce to the opportunities in Workamajig? I don't know if we built out, but Zapier is our kind of link between Workamajig and Salesforce. So I would say we'd probably want to email into your account manager to see if it's on the opportunity side. I don't remember if it is or not, but we do have a link between Salesforce, and again, that's just through what we call Zapier or Zapier. So if you type in Zapier, this is ultimately the API that would then link us to things like Salesforce. So if you come into Zapier, it mentions all the different apps that are linked. And I think this one of these shows the different options that we have, what pulls in and what doesn't. So Zapier or Salesforce is one of those. There it is. So yeah, we do have some integration with them. It's through Zapier, but again, you'd probably want to reach out to your account manager to get a little bit more detail in that. Okay, so then next item that we were talking through was this include in forecast again. So this brings it in again. The project does have to be in that status because this is kind of the first step to it. Status that pulls in based off of whether it says include in forecast or not. And then if it's not an approved estimate, the only way to bring that in is the include in forecast option. Okay, so that was the potential project, and then I had an actual retainer in the system. So this is my retainer. I had $120,000 is my total budget. Nothing fell in prior months because I just set it up this particular month. I've not billed it yet. And then because it's a $10,000 retainer that spanned 12 months, it'll go ahead and just put $10,000 in each of those. So I'll jump to the project first, and then I'll jump to the retainer. Oh, this brings me to the retainer. So this is the actual retainer that I set up. I started it today, and it hasn't been billed, so there's no last build. It's for this particular company. How often do we bill this? So is it monthly, quarterly, or yearly? I chose monthly so that each of my buckets would have that 10,000. But of course, if it's quarterly or yearly, that's going to matter, of course, because if I did quarterly, then it's going to show maybe I would have, 10,000 in this month and then nothing for the next 3 months. And then, 4 months after that, then it would show the income. But obviously this determines what months that spans over. Number of periods. So this is what told the system it's going to go for 12 months or periods. Again, you might have something different. So then we just call it periods here. But if it's monthly, then it's 12 months. If it's quarterly, it's 12 quarters. If it's 12 for years, then obviously 12 years. So your number of periods, if you were to leave it blank, that basically just lets it go on infinitely up until you put in some sort of number or you inactivate it to say this is no longer spanning. Again, I did not bill it, so I have 12 months remaining. My amount per period. So this is where I told the system we're going to bill, or it's going to prompt me to bill $10,000 for each of these, regardless of how many projects. There could be 0 projects, there could be 1,000 projects. Does not matter to the system. This is the total that it's going to look at to say, okay, well, if we start at March, then 10,000 in March, 10,000 in April, May, June, July, and continues on. Currency, if you're using multi-currency, what's your cost per period? And then some of the other details, what's actually included and what is not. So that's where it's getting the information for the retainer is when does it start? How often does it go? And how many months does it span for? How much is it per period? So that's what brought this in is I had 12 months at that $10,000. So that of course becomes the 120,000. I've not billed it. I have $10,000 per month, and that's where it's going to go ahead and get that detail. So luckily, I think retainers are probably the easiest part to read because they're pretty straightforward. The amounts are not swaying per month. If I went in and updated that retainer because the scope of that retainer changed, so maybe they're asking us for more work and we said, well, that'll be, 2,000 more. Again, this is not going to update if I go in and update this. So if I end up changing that retainer information and saying it's going to be 15,000 instead, my revenue forecast will not change at all. So if I go out and go back into that revenue forecast, that retainer won't have changed. And that's again, because the retainers are not updating live. So again, still 10,000, nothing changed. Okay, so what some people do, they might go in and update the forecast if you need to, you could do that. You can create a financial budget from a forecast. That's kind of a separate call, but if you're using financial budgets and you want this to go ahead and create the budget, you can add in an adjustment. What this does is it'll say, well, what do you want to bring in and how do you want to go ahead and set that up? So is it an item or a service? what's the item or service, what GL company, what office, what client, who do we assign it to, and then the months and totals. And that would actually then just be an item that you can bring in. You could tell it to find new items. So, if a new project had come in and we want to go ahead and bring that in, you can say, go ahead and find new items. And then you can also adjust the grid. So if you say that I want a certain way to see these, you can see detail, you can edit. This brings in the field. So maybe you're never using currency. You can uncheck currency and change, different options as far as what shows. And then this is where you actually get the order. So if I come in, you'll see it's status first, and then start date, and then number of months and currency. You can actually click and drag these. So if I said, well, currency, I'm going to bring down a little bit, and I'm going to move, maybe the monthly up, you can actually redo that. And that would show for company default. So again, this is for everyone. Otherwise, if you wanted to change it per security group, you could choose a security group, override those settings, and have it be different per group. Though I don't find a lot of people are changing it per group, but that's where you can go in and actually edit your grid. You can also print this out either through PDF or Excel. A lot of people do that. And then the other option that you have to edit live would be changing the name of it, how you are spreading out your expenses. You have the same options that you did on the very first page. And then group by type. This is not project type. This is opportunity versus potential project versus approved project. Instead, some people will change it by account manager. Group it by account manager, group it by office, group it by client. And I think we're actually bringing in project manager as an option as well, because we just added in project manager versus account manager not too long ago. So I believe that's coming in the April update, where you would have the option to group by project manager instead of account manager if that's what we need. So here's our options for grouping. Again, if I change it to something else and save, it's going to group by the different account managers. And then for some of my projects, apparently I don't have account manager, so it's going to be blank. But that is something that you can go in and change as needed. I like it by the type, so I know that it's a potential project versus an approved project versus opportunity. The last one is, again, that option to then forecast all of the projects as time and material instead of the fixed fee option. A couple of questions came in. So with fixed fee invoices on the billing schedule, is there a workaround to get a revenue estimate in the forecast versus an advance bill? So let me read it again. Is there a workaround to get revenue estimate in the forecast? I'm not sure what you mean by that. If you can maybe word that a little bit different. Next one is, does Workamajig offer some type of time resource forecast to manage project timelines and employees? So time and resource would probably be your staff schedule. You have in your project, resource manager, there's a couple of options for that. This would be staff schedule. This is based off of the person, and or if it's not assigned to a person, you have your services. So it'd probably be something that you'd go more in depth on a different call. You can always reach out to your account manager, but this would be on the person side. It's based off of typically approved projects. So again, the status codes, is it considered to be active or not? And then if you're assigning people to tasks, you would see what they're assigned to. And then if they're not assigned, if you have it just said, maybe account manager is assigned to that task rather than an actual person, then you can see what's assigned to each of those people instead. I'm going to make this a 2-week view, but again, I would probably review this more with your account manager. So here's all my people, and here's how busy they are for these a couple of weeks that we have, right? And then if I didn't assign it to a person, but I put in what service was needed, here's how many hours for each of those days that we have. And then of course you click in, you get to see what all that detail is. So this would be something that you'd want to check with your account manager on, or I think we have a webinar on it as well. So if maybe you don't have time to schedule, but you can listen to the recording kind of at your leisure, that's an option too. Next question is, with fixed fee projects, it looks like I would have the option to select an initial 50, then 50 in the month the project is scheduled to end. So fixed fee, it's based off of the billing schedule. So if I come out, let me find my projects. Okay, so our fixed fee. So here's my fixed fee one. Again, it's based off of the status. This definitely pulls it in. It is a fixed fee project. And then it's looking at the approved estimate. So my estimate is in here. I have it approved. It's for the $13,000. And then I have that billing schedule split over those different months. So 4 different months. So this project would span 4 months on my revenue forecast. It spans March for 25%, which is 3405. Next one is same thing, 3405 in April. May would be 3405. And then, so I just evenly divided it 25% over each of those months. So if I look at the forecast for this project, it would then just show the 3405 over each month. I want to change it back to my type. Okay, so then fixed fee, there's my 3405, 3405, 3405, because I just have it time and material. The billing method is just evenly dividing it. If I had unevenly divided it, like this one was a time and material project, or sorry, fixed fee project, but I didn't do an even split, right? I did 25, 25, then 50. It's just basing off of what 25% is, which is 3405, 3405, and then 6,800. So if I look at that, the revenue forecast, whoops, wrong one. This, and I look at that project, 3405, and then the 6,000. So it's truly looking at whatever your billing method or your billing schedule is, whatever amounts you have in there, whether it's a percentage or a total. So these ones I just did percentages, but if instead I did that it was going to be 3,500 here, and if I wanted to do like 1,500 here, and then the remaining, whatever that would be, so that's 5,000, and my budget was the 13, would be like 1,300 or so, I don't know. But yeah, basically whatever you do with this, it'll then, so this would be 3,500. It would then say in March, it's 3,500, April, it's 1,500, and then May would be the 6,810. And that's what it's going to base off of. Next question is, does the revenue is based on billing? Typically revenue is based on the service provided. If we build in advance, we cannot recognize that till we've earned it. So this isn't really looking at what's actually billed, it's just forecasts, right? I mean, you do have an actual billing category just to see, well, what have we billed? But these are based off of the estimates that you have in the system. So whatever you estimate for as far as revenue that you guess revenue would come in, that's what's going to show in here. It's not going to pull in actual billing. So I did my actual billing for March. It is the same, but let's say I had billed a different amount, that would not change my forecast for March. So my actuals do not change my buckets here. It'll always show you what did you actually forecast for, or what did you budget for, basically. Okay, so Again, it's definitely something that you can test out just because everything can be deleted. If you want to test on real data, because of course, I'm sure you guys have real projects in there, then you can always pull a revenue forecast just to see what it looks like, because it's not going to change anything on your back end. It's not going to update projects for you or anything like that. But I would say go ahead and test it out just to see how it works, because obviously my data is going to be a lot more different than yours. I mentioned being able to send it out to account managers. If you're checking the box for each of those, you can notify, you can mark it as sent, or you can mark it as reviewed. So if I go in and hit notify, it's going to go ahead and send out those notifications. If I was an account manager on each of those, I would then have a option in here, and it would show as a revenue forecast to review. I don't think I'm any of the account managers. It was a bunch of other people, but it would have showed in there. I could take a look at it, and then what could happen is you could go in and kind of review some of those different categories, and you could go change things if you want to, and then it would say that it was approved, or whatever the status of that one actually is. Someone said, back to the estimate question, if we have multiple estimates under one, some approved and some others, will they all appear? It's only when it's approved or include in forecast, but it would lump them together. So let's say I have 3 approved estimates. They're all for, 3,000 each. Well, then the forecast would account for $9,000 because they're approved. If I have 2 that are approved for 3,000, one that's not approved and not has that checkbox for include in forecast, then the forecast would be 6,000. So it's only looking at approved estimates or the include in forecast option in the estimate settings. But yeah, that's a good question. It will lump approved estimates together. Okay, so I mentioned that these aren't going to update live. So again, if I am updating any of these projects, this isn't really going to change anything up until I maybe update my forecast. It'll recalculate different things. Otherwise, what some people do is they'll leave this forecast as it is and then just create another one. You can have as many forecasts in the system, even if they're all exactly the same, that they start in March for 2020. We evenly divided it. We chose all these different types to pull in and all of that information. So you have those different options in there, but you can create as many revenue forecasts as you want, but then just make sure that your names are easy for you to figure out what forecast was this. Is this our final? Is this our kind of test one that we did? So that's the update option again. Otherwise, you're going in and adding it in. The couple of things that you can't really change. So since I've started this forecast, I can't exclude certain things. So if I said I don't want opportunities, then I either have to just delete the whole thing or leave it in the system and then create a new one. So again, create a new one, plus button next to your name. You have that revenue forecast as an option, and then you're basically just going through. So again, some of the options you can go in and change after the revenue forecast is created, but most are pretty much locked down at that point. So you would just have to either delete the original one and start over, or just start over and leave the other one in there. You do have the option of printing it out if you wanted to, PDF or Excel. And then a couple of options that I didn't really show is you have a gross, you have net, which will always come in as negatives. And it'll even tell you net values will be shown as negative numbers. So if you're like, well, that doesn't make sense, just everything's coming in as negatives, that's how we set it up. And then here's your profit side. You would also be able to see those different profits in there as well. So you have 3 different kind of toggles that you can take a look at. Whatever one you're checked, if you have the print option, it's going to print whatever is under this category. It won't print all 3. So if you wanted all 3, you would just go in, choose net, then print, then choose profit, then print. Someone had a question. If you create a revenue invoice to account for contractors, will the fee for the project be reflected on the forecast? aka will the fee reduce in the forecast? So if it's just a revenue invoice, it'll show as actual billings in there. But if you didn't really account for that fee anywhere, so if I didn't put it in labor or expenses in the estimate, it's not really going to show in your forecast. It'll show as an actual billing, but not a forecast. Okay, so that's pretty much time. This is definitely something that you can review with your account manager. So if you want it to be more tailored to your company, or if you guys want to kind of do a test with your own account manager, you're more than welcome to schedule that. You're just going to do that at training@workamajig.com. That's how you can get to your scheduler, and then they can set up an in-depth question. But again, you always have that help guide, which again has a ton of information on the revenue forecast, because it's always hard to remember all the little rules that are there. But I feel like we did a pretty good job for the actual forecast. So again, setup is going to be the big part of making sure that we have each one of these set up. And then how it actually works, it'll tell you, well, expenses, if it's associated with the task, if it's not associated. So this is also very in-depth, and it should, if you just have like a really quick question, it probably will cover most of what you would have. Okay. Last question is there a report in which shows you can revenue forecast compared to your operating budget? Kind of like a forecasted P&L. A lot of clients are asking for a report based off of revenue forecast. It's something that we're working on, but it's not something we have currently. So I would say email into your account manager, because we're continuing to take those requests, and then ask for whatever it is you are looking for in that report, and then we can see if that's something that we can build. But thank you everyone for joining the webinar today. The recording will be posted up in that support guide if you went to the webinar section. So if you come back to the main page, you have the webinars here. It typically gets posted in a couple of days, so it'd be 2022. And then once the recording is in, we typically just post them kind of like we do with these 2021s. It would just show in here, and then you click on it and it would be the recording. So recording in a couple of days will be posted here once it's up. So if you had someone that missed it, or if you want to re-review it, you're more than welcome to do that. Thank you everyone, and have a great day.